From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. And coming up today, the presenter of the latest Dan Upson Lecture here at K-State from the U.S. Air Force, Medical Group Commander and Veterinary Consultant Sam Barringer, who spoke last night about how society could learn from the resiliency and determination of agricultural producers. We'll hear from him next. Also, K-State's David Proctor talks about a new initiative just launched by the Kansas Health Foundation intended to improve access to quality food in areas of the state where availability is currently limited, including small rural towns which are without local grocery stores. And later, K-State's Charlie Lee reports on a study of large carnivore predation on humans. All that next on Agriculture Today.
Science Communication Week is coming to Manhattan November 6th through 11th. Kansas State University, Sunset Zoo, and Flint Hills Discovery Center are bringing together local science students, professors, and professionals, as well as journalists from National Public Radio and National Geographic to share their insights and discoveries. Find out about all the free public events at k-state.edu/SciComm. That's k-state.edu/SciComm.
Last evening here in Manhattan, the 15th Dan Upson Lecture was presented as a part of the series that's promoted and operated by the student group here at K-State, Food for Thought. The individual who presented that lecture this time around has quite a career in animal agriculture, in veterinary health. The premise of his lecture: why do agriculturists stand during the National Anthem? Dr. Sam Barringer is with us. Sam, welcome to K-State, to Manhattan, first of all.
Thanks, Eric.
Now, your career and your story is quite interesting. You do have this background in animal health, of course, but it's very much tied into the military. How all of that came about, if you would.
I'll just preface that by saying I'm such a blessed individual because I do get to interface with both agricultural and the military as well. And the folks that are in agriculture are just the best in the world. They're just salt of the earth, to borrow a term, and they're such a great bunch of folks to work with. Then you take 4% that are in the military, and they're very unique, special people as well. So first of all, being able to be in both communities, I'm very blessed. But born and raised in agriculture, around dairy cows all my life, and then off to the military. While I was in the military, I got my undergraduate degree and applied to veterinary school. And I got into veterinary school, and the military let me out of my obligation early to attend veterinary school. And, you know, folks in agriculture, we take our obligations seriously. We're wired a little bit differently than the general public is. So I needed to make good on that obligation and joined the reserves shortly after leaving veterinary college. And 32 years later, I have a military career and enjoy a very blessed veterinary career as well.
In your current position, you're the commander of the 932nd Medical Group with the United States Air Force, correct?
Yes, so that's that medical group is out of Scott Air Force Base, and we have 400 to 450 individuals, medical doctors, dentists, nurses, where our primary mission is to deploy. So when someone is injured in theater and we need to bring them home, that's what we're trained to do. It's kind of cool to be the veterinarian who gets to tell the doctors what to do. I'm in a great spot. I move the pieces around so that my message to them, or their why, is always our why is to bring Joe home. Right. And 72% of all statistics are made up on the spot. So I'm going to make one up here, and that is, if you're injured on an interstate in America today and you have similar injuries in theater in Afghanistan, Iraq, wherever our men and women are deployed, based on our ability to manage casualties, your odds of survival are greater in those theaters based on military medicine than they are in an interstate here in Kansas.
Wow.
So we've really amped this up, and as Americans, we can still be very, very proud of our investment in our military and what we can get done.
Absolutely. Your experience in veterinary medicine, though, is translated into this service in what fashion, and the ability to respond accurately? How do those cross over?
Well, the crossover's not immediately apparent unless you think about it, but folks in agriculture and folks in veterinary medicine have a very unique skill set, and I term the skill set conceptualization. And at its core, it's the ability to take multiple, seemingly ambiguous inputs, and you don't know where they're coming from, and then you develop them into a strategy to solve a problem. And it is a skill set that is sorely missing in society. But folks in agriculture have that skill set almost inherent. They just, either they have it or it's so much a part of them they don't even recognize that it's going on. And so as you think about combat, war, all of the things with managing multiple ambiguous inputs, having folks with that skill set is at a premium. So as a veterinarian, having that skill set and utilizing that skill set, I naturally began to climb the ranks and be in a place where I'm at today. The aeromedical evacuation capacity for the Air Force rests almost exclusively in the reserves. We own that mission, and of that, there are only 4 med groups in the Air Force, and I'm commander of one of those. And so as you have that skill set, people recognize it, and then you are able to exercise that for the greater good. So while it's veterinary medicine, and I told stories last night about how we used veterinary medicine for the greater good and made a difference. But today, everything's about how do I use that skill set to the greater good of bringing injured soldiers, sailors, and airmen home.
And to your presentation, once again, it was entitled last evening, Why Do Agriculturists Stand During the National Anthem? Clearly, you're tying into current events, right?
Yeah, so whenever there is a challenge, doesn't matter where it's at in the world, we're trained as folks in agriculture to be very proactive to address a challenge. So when we think about working in agriculture and we look out at our pens and we see cattle that are injured, or we see a storm is coming in, and we have all of these challenges that come at us, folks in agriculture are less than 3% of the people in America, yet we feed 97% of this country, plus many other millions across the globe. So as it would relate to the challenges that are in front of us, we're trained at a very young age, if we came up through agriculture, that when things are tough, the last thing we're going to do is take a knee. Okay, we're not taking a knee. That's when you rise to the occasion and you move forward. And so as I've worked in special operations and special forces, and I've seen the excellence that people in agriculture bring to the military fight, it's that sort of culture that has empowered people in agriculture to succeed in spite of some really overwhelming odds. Taking a knee is symbolic of quitting, and that's not really what people in agriculture do. So while there are social injustices across, we're not an ideal country. We've all got challenges that we've got to fix. But rather than demonstrate that by an act of, even in the sport of football, taking a knee is giving oneself up. Rather than do that, rise up and take on the challenge, because that's what people in agriculture do. We absolutely will bow up and we'll put our head down until the mission's done. And that's really what this is all about.
How does that message, that implication, get conveyed to the general public, though? Agriculturalists listening today hear what you're saying and concur. Can that message be broadened to reach more people somehow?
Well, I would say, when you think about, doing lectures like the Upson Lecture series or those sorts of things, there are several messages that need to be broadened, and that is, one, the value of agriculture and what we bring to the table. At the end of the day, Eric, national security is entirely dependent on food supply. And if our food supply does not work, our country can't work. And we've got demonstrations of that. And almost every conflict that is across the world today can be boiled down to food supply. And if you think about what you would do if your mom, your dad, your child wasn't eating or couldn't have access to food, what would you do today? And so this idea where we can create wealth through agriculture, we don't generate wealth, we create wealth. We take sunshine and a seed and create wealth. We don't generate it. Generate means trading on the stock market. That's different than creating wealth. So we're the creators of wealth in this country. And so things like the Upson Lecture allow us to transmit what we know and understand to anyone who wants to listen. At the same time, what we can't do is get caught up in a lot of this social unrest and offend people. And this idea, for instance, people that do social protest, and even if it's around the National Anthem, I choose not to be offended by that even as a military person. I fully accept that in that society, in their cause, there's a significant problem that we need to address as a country. I'm not offended by them, but I will challenge them to stand and go and fix this problem. Don't take a knee, go fix it. And so as we interface with folks that are not in agriculture, don't have any idea what they do, we're different, okay? And let's embrace those differences. Let's not fight about them. And as we take that approach, then we, instead of creating division, we create unity. And the message has not been well communicated from agriculture, but that doesn't mean you quit, right? It's the premise of this whole thing. You don't take a knee, you keep on swinging.
Appreciate you presenting the lecture. Appreciate you being Mike's side with us right here, Sam. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
And again, he presented the 15th Dan Upson Lecture at Kansas State University here in Manhattan last evening. Sam Barringer, and he is the commander of the 932nd Medical Group with the United States Air Force and a veterinary operations consultant. And he's been visiting with us about the theme that he played upon during his presentation on why do agriculturalists stand during the National Anthem. He's been our guest on this part of Agriculture Today, and we'll have more shortly on this, the K-State Radio Network.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128-plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
This is the K-State Radio Network, and welcome back. This past Monday, a new initiative was announced out of the Kansas Health Foundation, and it will have definite K-State ties, to be sure, which we'll outline here with our guest. Here with us from the Center for Engagement and Community Development at Kansas State University, the director of that center, David Proctor. David, this initiative fits very nicely with some of the previous activities that your center has taken on in recent years with regard to the Rural Grocery Initiative, correct?
That's absolutely correct. We see the Kansas Healthy Food Initiative really as a significant extension of the work that we've done with the Rural Grocery Initiative. From 2007 up until now, we've been working across the state, primarily in rural communities of 2,500 people or less, to try and start as well as revitalize small grocery stores in those towns. With the Kansas Healthy Food Initiative, we're not only going to be working in those same rural communities, but we will now also be working in urban areas, Kansas City, Topeka, Wichita, any place where there is a food desert, where there is just a lack of food access. That's where this initiative will be working across the state.
And you used that descriptive of food desert. Folks may not be acquainted with that phrase, but it does aptly describe some true issues that often go under the radar here in Kansas anyway, correct?
You know, that's absolutely right. It's ironic that in Kansas, which is the wheat state, the breadbasket of the world, literally, there are hundreds of thousands of Kansans that live in areas where there just is not access to healthy foods. And in those areas, in those counties, those communities, both urban and rural, where there is a lack of access, and also where there oftentimes is fairly significant areas of poverty. Those areas are labeled as food deserts.
We want to visit about the tangible things that this center will be pursuing with the support of this grant from the initiative. In fact, it's $4.2 million overall put forth by the Kansas Health Foundation. But your center will be working with almost $870,000 of that, nearly a fourth of that, right?
That's right. So really there's two prongs to the Kansas Healthy Food Initiative. One is a financing piece. And so there's another entity that's involved. It's called a Community Development Financial Institution, and they're going to serve essentially as a bank. And so the bulk of this money, a little over $3 million, is going to go to that bank to provide flexible loans, a few grants that will be available for folks to either build new or renovate existing food retail operations. Kansas State University's Center for Engagement and Community Development comes into play because we are really the liaison between the community and that financial institution. So when people are applying, when they want to apply for these funds, they will make an application that is online, and I can talk about that website here in a minute. But that application is going to come to us. And what we're going to do is to work with that community to make sure that they are eligible for these funds, to understand the needs of that community, and then communicate those needs to this financial institution that will then take over and serve really as the loaning office for these dollars.
So when you think about this initiative and applying for it, what are the criteria that you'll really be seeking out?
So there are several criteria for individuals and communities that might be interested in establishing or renovating some healthy food retail. Number one, there has to be a very clear commitment to healthy food. So we're not talking about opening a small convenience store where it's going to be mostly pop and chips or something like that. There has to be a strong commitment to healthy food. Secondly, it has to be in this area that we just talked about. It has to be in these areas of food deserts where there is just a lack of access, a lack of grocery stores available to residents in that particular area. The third criteria that needs to be met is that it has to be in a lower income area of either the county or the city. And frankly, there are many of those areas across Kansas that would be eligible for that. The fourth criteria is that we want to make sure that the project that's being proposed fits with the needs of the community. And so as I said a little bit ago, one of our jobs is going to be to work with these towns, to work with the leadership that is trying to open these kinds of businesses, and make sure that it is wanted by the community, that it's needed by the community, that it fits within the goals or some kind of plan within the community. And so we call it, is there a community fit? And that's a fourth criteria. And then finally, the fifth criteria is that we want to make sure that there's a little bit of experience there, someone involved that knows something about retail operations, grocery operations. So those are the criteria that we're going to be looking for. And
those will be customized to the location and the situation, as you're strongly suggesting. No two circumstances are alike with our community.
No, absolutely. So we've already had some interest. Some people have emailed us. The application has just become available. But even before we launched the initiative, we had some interest, and they ranged everywhere from the smallest of towns under 1,000 people, to some of the urban neighborhoods in Sedgwick and Wyandotte County. And you're absolutely right. There is an application. There are those criteria that they have to meet. But we recognize that every community, every neighborhood is unique, and we're going to be working to, like you said, customize those applications so that they hopefully can be financed through this initiative.
And David, you and your center have been pursuing this cause of small community revitalization for a number of years. So this fits hand in glove with that then.
Absolutely. So since 2007, Kansas State University, through our Center for Engagement and Community Development, has been working with rural communities across the state to try and either sustain these small businesses or start these new businesses, because we have believed since that time, for 11 years now, that these small stores are anchor businesses, anchor institutions in rural communities, and we want to make sure that they have every chance to survive and thrive.
Now, applying for this kind of support for establishing those healthy food centers in whatever locale might qualify, how do folks or leaders locally go about that?
So there is a website where the application is located. The website address is kansashealthyfood.org. So that's all one word, kansashealthyfood.org. And when you go to that website, what you'll see is that there is a very clear link that says apply. You click on that link and the application will come up. And you can fill it out online and submit it to us via email, or you can print it off and fill it out by hand and then mail it to us or fax it to us or scan it and email it that way. The other thing that you can do is if you have questions, is give us a call. And our phone number is 785-532-6868. And we have several staff that would be more than happy to walk you through the application process.
Excellent. And once applications are filed, you will be considering them as they come in for eligibility?
That's correct. So this is an ongoing application process. The Kansas Health Foundation has committed these funds for 3 years, but already we have had other financial entities that have expressed interest in being part of this, and so I imagine that this will go beyond 3 years. But we will take applications as they come in. Our goal is to respond to people within a week and let them know that we received their application, talk with them about any questions or gaps that might be in the application, and then it'll take us a little time to sort of determine eligibility, but we'll work through that as quickly as we can.
We'll repeat the contact information, that website, in just a moment. But as a last thought here, how big a step forward is this, do you think, David, in regard to making sure that there are healthy foods accessed around Kansas?
I think this has the potential to be a game changer in Kansas. Over the years, when people have contacted us and they've said, we lost our grocery store 3 years ago, 5 years ago, what can we do to get one back? One of the biggest hurdles is often funding. Yeah. So now there is a mechanism for flexible funding that is being supported by the Health Foundation, as you said. It's being managed by this community development financial institution. You have Kansas State University to help you work through the application process. I just think that this is a significant step in improving Kansans' access to healthy foods.
Thank you for briefing us on what's taken place here, David.
Well, thank you. I appreciate this opportunity very much.
He is David Proctor, and he directs the Center for Engagement and Community Development here at Kansas State University. It will be working in partnership with the Kansas Health Foundation as part of this Kansas Healthy Food Initiative, just unveiled this past Monday, to help implement healthy food access in places where it's sorely needed here in Kansas. If you'd like to learn more about this initiative or to learn about the application process, Kansas Healthy Food, that's all one word, kansashealthyfood.org, or you can call the center at this number, 785-532-6868 here on the campus, 785-532-6868. We'll be back with more in a few moments. This is the K-State Radio Network.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University. Eric Atkinson here. Moving on now to today's agricultural news headlines for you, courtesy in part of DTN. The USDA's weekly crop harvest progress report out for the state of Kansas, and for the week ending this past weekend, the topsoil moisture supplies in the state were at 2% surplus and 76% adequate, 22% called short to very short. Subsoil moisture is at 1% surplus and 75% adequate, 24% short to very short. The condition of the winter wheat crop is called 59% good to excellent, 30% fair, 11% poor to very poor. Planting is at 93% complete. The average is 97% for the day. And wheat emergence is at 73%. That's behind the 85% average. Very near the finish line for the fall harvest, but not quite there yet. Corn harvested, 88% complete, 93% is the average, and the Kansas soybean harvest is 85% done. That's very near the 84% average. Grain sorghum still behind, harvested at 63%, 74% is the average for this date. On the national scale, the U.S. corn harvest made up more ground last week, jumping ahead 16% from the previous week, according to the USDA. It estimates that 70% of corn was harvested as of Sunday, 13% behind the 5-year average of 83% harvested. That does represent a continued improvement from the previous report, when the corn harvest the previous week trailed the average pace by 18%. And the national soybean crop is 90% in now. That's down slightly from the 5-year average of 91%. Meantime, the USDA says that 91% of winter wheat nationally is planted. That's even with the 5-year average. 75% of winter wheat has emerged. That's down slightly from 77% for the average. The USDA also says 55% of the winter wheat crop has rated good to excellent. Grain sorghum harvest nationally 72% done. That's behind the average of 78%. The final agricultural trade numbers are in from the USDA for the 2017 fiscal year, and the results may surprise some. Here's more from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
Agriculture Department analysts had been projecting that in fiscal year 2017, which ended September 30th, the U.S. would export $139.8 billion worth of ag products.
And it clocked in at 140.5.
Oh, but in this case, I guess you analysts don't mind being wrong.
Yeah, that's correct.
USDA trade analyst Bryce Cook. So exports did do better than expected, coming in $10.9 billion, or 8% higher than 2016. The ag trade surplus, 28% higher, mostly because of gains in bulk commodity exports.
Wheat was up 21% in value terms. Soybeans was up 17%, and corn was up 6%.
Cotton, the big winner, though, up 70% in value, 50% in volume. Now, why did U.S. exports do so well?
The dollar is still generally weak, and you have had pretty decent income growth in developing countries. Those are a growing percent of where U.S. goods are sold.
And Cook says the U.S. had plenty of good quality product to sell. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
Now, trade analysts believe that President Trump's trip to Seoul, South Korea, may go beyond North Korean-related security issues and may help determine the direction of talks to amend the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement. The president arrives in the South Korean capital tomorrow to meet with President Moon Jae-in for the second leg of his five-nation swing through East Asia. On the sidelines, U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and South Korean Trade Minister Kim Hyung-chong will discuss the next step in the thorny issue of the trade agreement. There is a possibility that the president will mention the need to cut the U.S. trade deficit with South Korea, according to Kim. During a parliamentary audit October the 31st, he made those comments, but Kim said he does not expect that Trump will bring up specific sectors of trade. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and now for you dairy producers, the weekly feature from the Animal Sciences and Industry Department here at K-State, Milk Lines. Awaiting with that, as always, K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk. Mike?
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy farmers concerning the lighting in their freestall barns and other facilities where they keep their lactating dairy cows. As we move into the fall and winter seasons, I realize that the days are becoming shorter and supplemental lighting becomes more important. We have a general goal that for lactating dairy cows, we need to provide at least 20-foot candles of light, 16 to 18 hours each day. And as we move into the shorter days, we fall further and further behind. Even in the summertime, We don't generally reach 16 hours of daylight here in Kansas, and actually we're short an hour and a half or so in most of our locations. So really we need supplementing light year-round, but more importantly in the fall and winter when we have the extremely short days. So why is this supplemental light so important to our lactating dairy cows? Well, first, when we have shorter days, we see an increase in melatonin. Melatonin has a negative impact on IGF-1 release from the glands in the brain. As a result of that, milk production is reduced. So in studies where we've supplied supplemental lighting, again 16 to 18 hours total for the day, we've seen anywhere from a 2 to 4 pound increase in milk production per day. Late lactation cows respond as well as early lactation cows. So we actually do see this effect across the entire herd. So what do we need to think about as dairy farmers? Well, first, many times our facilities are a bit older and the lighting system probably needs to be replaced. We've got some really great new technology that you might want to consider. It's called LED, or light-emitted diodes, rather than the traditional bulbs that we've normally used in our barns. Number one, these are more energy efficient than anything we've had to use in the past. And secondly, they also produce more light. This is great for many of our facilities. So if you're considering relamping your barn, I would encourage you to take a look at the LED fixtures. Yes, they are more expensive initially, but they use less electricity. They provide better light for your barn. Maybe you can get by with fewer fixtures. And as a result, your total electric cost will be less. So over time, usually a fairly short period of time, maybe only 3 years or so, you will pay for that extra cost of the fixture. In some cases, the maintenance may be less as well, which is another plus for your farm. So this is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers that now might be a good time to consider the lighting needs in their dairy facilities and plan to make changes in the near future.
Thanks, Mike. And this reminder, Agriculture Today is now available every day via podcast. You can subscribe to that podcast by going to ksre.ksu.edu/news. Click on the Radio Network tab and then the Agriculture Today link, ksre.ksu.edu/news. This is Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State Research and Extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
Agriculture Today is back now. Another stint on wildlife management for you coming up. Charlie Lee is a wildlife specialist with K-State Research and Extension. He's along with us every Tuesday right here. Well, Charlie, you have some new research information on large carnivore attacks on humans, the subject of a new study. And this was looked at over quite a span of time, but the prevalence of those attacks may catch a few folks off guard.
I think it's surprising that as many people would think large carnivores are decreasing in number, but I think what is surprising is that the carnivore attacks on humans is increasing. This was a study just published in Human-Wildlife Interactions Journal, and they charted the number of attacks on humans by large carnivores in North America. They started out with collecting the data from a very exhaustive literature review. It included everything from a Google search using the terms large carnivore attacks and humans to master's thesis and PhD dissertations to newspaper reports. Everything that they could verify and document was put into a database. Out of that, they found 632 attacks on humans by large carnivores since 1955.
And when we say large carnivores, what species are we talking about?
Well, of those 600 attacks, those large carnivores would include grizzlies, black bears, polar bears, cougars, gray wolves, and coyotes. Those would be the large carnivores, mammalian carnivores, land carnivores here in North America. Well, 17% of those involve predation, meaning that carnivore took that human with the intent to feed on that human. There are some other attacks, but those would have been more of a defensive mode or protecting young, something like that. But out of those 600, the 106 involved predation. And when we looked at how those have increased over time, when you look at hundreds of millions of visitors to the National Park Service, they started with about 3 billion visitors in the decade beginning in 1955 and peaked at about 110 billion in the decade from 95 to 2005. So over 100 billion visitors for the National Park Service, peaked at about 17 predatory attacks per decade. But it started at 1 and gradually moved in the next 20 years to 10 predator attacks from large carnivores, then to 17, and in the decade from 2005 to 2014 had dropped back down to 12 attacks. So the general approach was to try to figure out what was causing these attacks. Mm-hmm. There's certainly some more risky behavior by humans than others. It's generally thought that approaching a female that has young is a behavior that may incite attacks. There was another thought that activity at night or at twilight would lead to some of these attacks, or perhaps the animal was wounded in a hunting activity, or perhaps you had a dog with you while walking in areas with large carnivores. But the overwhelming number of attacks occurred when children were left unattended. I guess that's not surprising. As these researchers suggested, that's what predators do. That perhaps we're just witnessing a very normal predator-prey relationship, and that predators that are looking for food are going to look for young that are left unattended or single individuals.
So it really comes back to humans being less adept at avoiding attacks and realizing the dangers therein, right?
Well, there's certainly a lot of people without the skill set to compete against large carnivores. That skill set not only includes physical prowess, but also the mental awareness of what areas to avoid and what times to avoid. They further looked at that information on the time of day those attacks occurred. And prey, in this case we would be talking about humans, respond to predation by modifying your habitat selection. And in this case we have, I would call, naive humans that are walking into areas that have large carnivores. And if they don't modify their habitat selection, their risk increases. And then they also are naive in that they're having this activity at risky times of day, during the night or early twilight. So those would be two ways that prey species have learned to avoid predation attacks. Perhaps humans once had that skill set, and now that's largely gone. Another issue is that vigilance, group size, certainly plays a role in prey survival. And as was borne out with this study, larger groups had fewer attacks by large carnivores. The most attacks occurred on young children that were left alone.
What it comes back to is awareness and common sense more than anything else when one happens to be within the habitat of one of these larger carnivores.
I think humans are going to have to change behavior based on the knowledge of what causes some of these predatory attacks if we want to continue to participate enjoying large carnivores in their natural environments. And unless we modify those behaviors, we have to accept the risk that survival may not always be the case. When we looked at the information, out of the 8 grizzly bear attacks, all were fatal. Out of 17 black bear attacks, 14 were fatal. 53 cougar attacks, 15 were fatal. 6 gray wolf attacks with 2 fatalities. And out of the 21 coyote attacks, there were 2 fatalities. So you can see that although cougars and coyotes were responsible for more than half of those attacks, they're also the smallest of the carnivores. And still, the number of mortalities or human fatalities is low from coyotes. It's a species that we have in high numbers in Kansas. They seem to be increasing in areas where we have more of a suburban-rural interface, and I expect those close encounters with humans and coyotes are going to continue to increase, even here in Kansas, where we do have a good awareness of the problems that coyotes might create.
Charlie, we appreciate the word on this. He's Charlie Lee, Wildlife Specialist, K-State Research and Extension. So goes our Tuesday edition, as always. Thanks for tuning in, and please be back with us here this same time tomorrow, won't you? Until then, Eric Atkinson here for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.